Japan is a country of rich colors, a diverse set of fashion, and a melting pot of both Western fashion and traditional Japanese clothing. In Japan, one finds a reverence for both the old and a complete push towards the absolute fringes of modern fashion. From the classic kimono to the modern lolita, Japanese clothing and fashion finds their roots in the old and classic styles from all over the world. The most obvious place to begin any discussion of Japanese clothing is with the kimono. The kimono was created during the Heian period, roughly 794 until 1192. It was during this time that Japanese artisans started to create clothing in single strips of cloth, and then sewing them together. This allowed for them to be simply wrapped around a user, and for a craftsman to pay little heed to the actual proportions of the individual, so long as the general size was large or small enough depending on the person. One of the advantages that the kimono provided over prior clothing, aside from the ease of making, was the ability for the kimono to be layered. This allowed for thick layers during the winter and thin layers made of more breathable materials during the summer, making the kimono highly adaptable to the climate one was in. In addition to the simple practicality of layers, like all things in life, the kimono took on other aspects of the culture. Colors started to be layered together, and complex patterns began to emerge. Not only did fashion become a concern, but so too did the kimono take on a militaristic concern as well. House sigils, dictating to whom a samurai served, from what family they came from, and other such information and intricacies started to emerge upon the kimono, eventually forming the kind of bright and complex kimonos we associate with Japan today. During the 10th century, the kimono was eventually adapted into more formal clothing such as the sokutai. The sokutai is in essence a complex version of the kimono, but was worn exclusively by high-ranking court officials, including the Japanese emperor. Unlike the kimono, however, the sokutai was not a unisex outfit and was instead worn by men only. Women instead wore what is known as a juni hitoi, a beautiful and elegant gown which was worn by the wives of high-ranking court officials, or in some cases by high-ranking servants of the emperor or the shogun. However, aside from these offshoots of the basic kimono, Japanese attire remained largely centered around the kimono. Though other garbs and gowns were worn, they were often in concert with the kimono instead of standalone pieces. One such garb was the kamishimo, which was worn by samurai warriors. The kamishimo was an outfit or costume worn over the kimono, usually one of knee length. The kamishimo was made of two parts, a top called the kinu, and the trousers called the hakama. The reason being for the shorter length of the kimono worn underneath the kamishimo is that the hakama were designed to be closed-legged garb, much like traditional Western pants. The legged pants instead of the single robe of the kimono allowed for the samurai to be easily able to ride horses, have more flexibility in movement, and shape armor to better protect the individual limb. As hakama served a largely militaristic purpose, they were most commonly worn by men. However, in the modern era, they are worn by women in traditional sporting activities such as kendo. Prior to the creation of the kimono and its popularization throughout Japan, there are very little records of traditional Japanese clothing. What is known is that certain elements of Japanese clothing, such as the tabi, a form of Japanese sock, did exist. The only real understanding of early Japanese clothing comes from their armor. As the metal from these armors were some of the only relics to survive the time period, it is far easier to trace the evolution of Japanese armor than it is Japanese clothing. However, as the video is directed at Japanese clothing, I'll merely gloss over the fact that, like the kimono, the armor of the samurai experienced a period of great extravagance. The highly intricate, bright, and beautiful armors associated with the samurais of Japan evolved alongside the kimono to show to whom the samurai served, their family, and other such honors. And like the kimono, which evolved into more formal sokutai, samurai armors also evolved into more complex armors to be worn by their generals and other high-ranking officers. After World War II, Japanese fashion became distinctively more westernized. Shops in the Harajuku district started to cater to Westerners who lived there. In time, this evolved into the premier location for youth fashion, counterculture, and cosplay, and is now one of the most influential fashion hubs in the entire world. Today, numerous different fashion styles have emerged from the Harajuku district. One such fashion style is the gyaru, which is marked by wearing a light bronzing tan on the skin and having brightly colored hair, usually blonde, in an attempt to mimic Western hairstyles in fashion. However, it has gone beyond the simple gyaru look and has evolved into continuously more extreme versions, one of these being the ganguru look, which is marked by deep bronzing of the skin, white paint around the eyes, and incredibly bright colors in both hair and clothing. On the other side of the fashion spectrum is the visual kei movement. Started in the early 1980s, Visual kei is a type of Japanese metal in which the artist wears clothing in an attempt to garner some sort of shock value. The majority of these bands go for a very androgynous and dark look to them, with men often wearing extravagant makeup in order to complete the look. The look can most commonly be traced to the punk movement in the West, and often borrows many similar styles from it. However, there is not a set style which unifies all visual kei bands, as oftentimes visual kei bands will have very contrasting looks, with some members dressed as Lolitias, while others are dressed in dark, aggressive clothing. The single most unifying trait they share is their attempts to push against all preconceptions of gender, fashion, and lifestyle. The last major fashion style, which was initially unique to Japan, but has permeated the entire world, is Lolitia fashion. Much like how the kimono is a traditional Japanese clothing item, the Lolitia fashion is based upon the high-class dresses of the Victorian age. All Lolitia fashion uses the basic designs of the Victorian dress. However, it is spread into several different subsets. The first major subset of the dollhouse fashion Lolitia. As the name suggests, this style of Lolitia fashion is an attempt to recreate in life the kind of aesthetics associated with a child's dollhouse. Bright colors, elegant dresses, and very refined actions. The dollhouse Lolitia will often be found drinking tea and acting in a manner befitting of the 17th century British noblewoman. On the other side of the coin is the Gothic Lolitia. Almost always dressed in black, this art style fuses the dark and depressing aspects of Gothic fashion and mixes it with the elegance of Lolitia. While color is not uncommon, it is usually in dark reds or purples and fuses with the black in order to keep the look of one who is in mourning. Whether Gothic, classical, or dollhouse, all aspects of Lolitia fashion has found an audience across the world. With the fashion styles being adapted in the West, and perhaps most shockingly, it has even been adapted to Islamic cultures in the Middle East and Malaysia, where entire fashion shows have taken place. And all Japanese fashion has become one of the forefronts of modern clothing trends, and over the last few decades has truly started to take roots in subcultures across the globe, as more Western bands and fans of those bands start to adapt the visual kei style, and the near global embrace of Lolitia fashion, the world has become more and more exposed to all things Japanese.